Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we are going to be diving back into the Republic because we left off in the Republic. We left off with determining what speech should be allowed in a good society. Should you allow just any speech that speaks ill of the gods, for instance, or of its leaders? That was the topic of the last discussion. And this next one gets into a whole new topic, so let's dig in and see what's up. So we left off at, well, my friend, at this stage, the aspect of music that concerns speeches and stories has probably been brought to a conclusion fully, since we have described what should be said and how it should be said. And there was agreement. Yes, I think so too. So, after this, in what remains the aspect that concerns the manner of song and melody? Of course, well, could not anyone at all discover by now what we must say about them and what they need to be like if we are going to be in harmony with what we said previously? And Glaucon said, with a laugh, well, Socrates, I'm afraid I am not included in this anyone at all. At the moment, at any rate. I am not really up to the task of deciding the sorts of things we should be saying, although I do have my suspicions. Surely you are up to the task of saying, firstly, the melody is composed of three things combined: speech, harmony, and rhythm. Yes, said he, this I can say at least. Well, insofar as is speech, it does not differ at all from speech that is not sung. It needs to be delivered according to the same types we prescribed earlier, and in similar manner, does it not? True. And indeed, the harmony and rhythm should follow the speech, of course. But we did say that in the case of speeches, we do not need to include dirges and lamentations. Of course not. Well, since you are musical, tell me, what are the dirge like harmonies? The mixed Lydian harmony, said he, and the tout Lydian, and some others like these. Should these not be taken away, since they are not even useful to women who are to be reasonable, let alone men? Indeed, and indeed, drunkenness, softness, and idleness in our guardians is most unseemly, of course. So, which of the harmonies are soft and suited to drinking parties? Ionic harmonies, said he, and also some Lydian harmonies that are called loose. Well, my friend, could you make use of these for military men? Not at all, said he. Indeed, it looks as if you only have the Doric and Phrygian harmonies left. I do not know these harmonies, said I, but please leave one harmony which would be appropriately imitate the sound and tone of voice of a courageous man engaged in military activities or in any use of force, a man who, even in failure or when wounded or facing death, or when some other misfortune befalls him, confronts the situation with steadfast endurance, and leave another one for this man when he is engaged in peaceful activity that is devoid of force and voluntary, persuading or imploring someone either by praying to a god or instructing or admonishing his fellow man, or when the roles are reversed and he submits to someone else who is asking him for something, or instructing or persuading him to change his mind. Acting according to his own mind in all of these without being boastful, conducting himself with sound mindedness and measure, always prepared to accept the outcomes. So leave these two harmonies, one forceful, the other voluntary, that will best imitate the utterances of sound minded, courageous men as they succeed and as they fail in their purpose. Well, said he, you are simply asking me to leave the ones I just mentioned. Therefore, said I, we shall not need to include many strong stringed instruments that play all of the harmonies in our songs and melodies. No, said he, not as I see it. Then we shall not engage artificers of triangles, harps, and all of the other many stringed instruments that play lots of harmonies. Apparently not. Well, what about flute makers and flute players? Shall we admit them into our city? Or is not the flute many stringed in the extreme? And are not the very instruments that play all of the harmonies just imitations of the flute? Of course, said he. Then the lyre and the cithara are left for use in the city, and in the countryside there would be pipes of some sort for the shepherds. Well, said he, that is what our argument is indicating. We are not really doing anything new, my friend, said I, just preferring Apollo and his instruments to Marsyas and the instruments that belong to him. By Zeus, said he, it seems we are not. By the dog, said I, without noticing it, we have been thoroughly purifying the city again, the one we called luxurious a moment ago. Well, we are being sound-minded, said he. Come on, then, let us also purify what is left. Yes, indeed, after harmony, we have the matter of rhythm, and we should not pursue complicated or variegated rhythm units. We should rather look for the rhythms of life which is orderly and courageous. And once we have seen these, the metrical foot must be made to follow the speech of such a person, and so should the melody. And the speech should not follow the foot in the melody, but it's your job to state what these rhythms are, just as you did with the harmonies. Well, by Zeus, said he, I cannot say, and although I can say from observation that there are 3 forms from which all rhythms are woven, just as there are 4 sounds, which are the source of all harmonies, I cannot say what sort of life each imitates. Well, said I, we shall take advice from Damon on these, and on the rhythms which are suited to absence of freedom, to aggression, and to madness, and what rhythms are to be left for their opposites. I am not clear about this, but I think I have heard him referring to some military rhythm as a compound, and as a dactyl, and as a heroic. I don't know how he arranged it, but up and down were made equal, passing into short and long, and I think he called one iambic and the other trochaic, and he assigned long and short to each. And in some of these he censured, or indeed praised, the tempo of the foot no less than the rhythms themselves, or else some combination of both. But as I said, we should refer all this to Damon, for a decision like this would involve a lengthy discussion. Do you think otherwise? By Zeus, I do not. But we can decide that grace and lack of grace follow good rhythm and lack of rhythm, of course. And indeed, good rhythm follows beautiful speech and resembles it, while lack of rhythm follows the opposite. And the same goes for good harmony and lack of harmony. If rhythm and harmony do indeed follow speech, as we said earlier, and speech does not follow them. But of course, said he, these must follow speech. But what about the manner of speaking, said I, and the speech itself? Do these not follow the disposition of the soul? Of course. And everything else follows the speech. Yes. So, good speech, harmony, and grace, and good rhythm follow good disposition. And not what is referred to as good disposition as a euphemism for silliness, but a mind truly endowed with a good and noble disposition. Yes, entirely so, said he. Well, must not these be pursued everywhere by our young people if they are to enact what is their own? Yes, these must be pursued. And surely, painting and any craftsmanship of this sort is full of these. Weaving is also full of them, house building too, and indeed all production of any other items. Even the nature of bodies and of anything else that grows. For good grace and absence of grace is inherent in all of these. Indeed, the lack of grace, rhythm, and harmony are the close kindred of bad speech and bad disposition. And the opposites are the close kindred and imitations of its opposite, a sound-minded and good disposition. Entirely so. Well then, should we only oversee the poets and compel them to portray the image of the good disposition in their poems, or else compose nothing in our city? Or should we also oversee the other artificers and prevent them from portraying this bad disposition, the unrestrained one, devoid of freedom and grace, either in images or living creatures, or on buildings, or in anything else they produce? And if they cannot comply, should we stop them from plying their trade in our city, in case our guardians, feeding on images of evil, in an evil pasture grazing freely day by day, gradually picking up a great deal from many different sources, unwittingly accumulate a single great evil of their own, in their own soul? Should we search rather for those artificers who are naturally capable of seeking out the noble and graceful nature, so that our young folk, as though dwelling in the healthy region, may derive benefit from everything that impinges upon their sight or hearing, from the noble works of the place, like a breeze that bears health from a wholesome region, and leads them unwittingly from their earliest childhoods to an affinity with noble reason, and friendship and concord therewith? Yes, that would be the best way to rear them. Very much so. Well then, Glaucon, is this not why being reared in music is of such supreme importance? Because rhythm and harmony, more than anything else, sink into the innermost soul and fasten most powerfully upon her, bringing good grace and making her gracious, provided the person has been reared aright, and having the opposite effect otherwise. And it is also of supreme importance because the person who has been reared in this, as he should be, would quickly discern any deficiencies in whatever he has not been well made or well wrought by nature. And, being rightly dissatisfied, he would praise and delight in whatever is good, receive this into his soul, and being nourished by it, he would become noble and good. And he would rightly criticize whatever is base, and he would hate it, even as a child before he was capable of understanding speech. And when speech finally came, someone reared in this way would welcome it most of all, recognizing it because of its familiarity. Yes, said he, I think it is for reasons of this sort that there is upbringing in music. So it is like when we had an adequate understanding of reading and writing, said I. Once we noticed that the individual letters, few in number, kept recurring in all the words they occur in, we showed the same regard for them, whether they were observed in long or short words, for we were eager to recognize them fully everywhere, because we were never going to be knowledgeable until we were able to do this. True. And we will not and we will not recognize images of letters that appear somehow in water or mirrors until we have first recognized the letters themselves, but both involve the same skill and practice. Entirely so. Well then, by the gods, can I say that in like manner we shall not become musicians ourselves, nor these guardians we say we should educate, until we can first recognize the forms of sound-mindedness, of courage, of freedom, of magnificence, and all that is akin to these, and indeed all the opposites of these, everywhere, in all the various places they appear, and can be aware of the presence wherever they are present, themselves and their images too, and show the same regard for minor instances as for major instances, because we believe that the skill and the practice is the same in each case. This must be so, very much so. Well then, if beautiful qualities internal to the soul coincide in the external form and are in agreement and concord with those and are of the same type, would not that not be the most beautiful sight for anyone with eyes to behold? Very much so. And indeed, what is most beautiful and most lovable? of course, then the musical person would love people who were like this and would not love someone who lacked such concordance. He would not in the deficiency were related to the soul. However, if the deficiency were something related to the body, he would accept this and be prepared to embrace it. I understand that you have a favorite like this, or you once had one, and I accept your point. But tell me this, do sound mindedness and excessive pleasure have anything in common? How could they, when excessive pleasure, no less than excessive pain, drives a person out of their mind? Does it have anything in common with excellence in general? Not at all. What about violence and lack of restraint? Least of all. And can you name any pleasure greater or more intense than sexual pleasure? I cannot, said he, or more manic pleasure either. But does not right love naturally love the orderly and the beautiful, with a sound mind and a musical spirit? Very much so, said he. So, should anything manic or anything akin to a lack of restraint be involved in right love? No, they should not be involved. So this particular pleasure should not be involved, nor should a lover and beloved who love and are loved in the right way have any share in it. No, by Zeus, Socrates, it should not be involved. And so it seems you will establish laws for the city we are founding, that a lover is to kiss, consort with, and touch his favorite as a father would his son, for beauty's sake, and only with his consent. And in general, that a lover is to associate with anyone that he is interested in such a way that their relationship will never seem to go beyond this. Or else he will come in for criticism as an unmusical fellow with no sense of beauty. Quite so. Well now, does it look to you as though our account dealing with music is at an end? At any rate, it has ended where it should end. Should considerations of music should end in considerations of love of the beautiful. I agree. After music, then, the young folks should be brought up in gymnastics. Indeed. Then they should also be brought up systemically in this, beginning in childhood and continuing through life. And it consists, I believe, in the following. See if you agree. Indeed, I am not of the view that if a body is sound, it makes a soul good by the body's own excellence. But, on the contrary, a good soul renders a body good as it can possibly be by the soul's own excellence. Is that your view too? That is how I see it, said he. Well, we would be doing the right thing if we were to care for the mind properly, and then trust it to determine precisely what the body needs, while we provide instruction on the general guidelines so that we do not have to give a lengthy account. Entirely so. Well, we said that the guardians must avoid drunkenness, for a guardian is surely the last person we would allow to get drunk and not know where on earth he is. Yes, said he, it would be absurd that a guardian would need another guardian to look after him. Well then, what about their food? Indeed, these men are athletes in contests of the utmost importance, are they not? Yes. In that case, would the condition of our modern athletes be suitable to these men? Perhaps. But, said I, this is a somewhat drowsy condition. It is perilous to their health. Or do you not see that they sleep their lives away, and that the athletes themselves become violently ill if they depart even a little from the prescribed way of life? Yes, I see this. Then there is some need for some more refined training for our warrior athletes, said I, who need to be like sleepless hounds, whose sight and hearing are as keen as they can possibly be, able to undergo lots of changes on military campaigns, changes of water, of their general diet, of summer and winter, without their health being in peril. This is how it seems to me. Now, would the best upbringing in gymnastics be closely related to the musical upbringing we described a little earlier? What do you mean? An appropriate gymnastic is also simple, I presume, especially in the case of warfare. In what way? You could, said I, even learn this sort of thing from Homer. For you know that on a campaign at the Feast of Heroes he does not feast them on fish, even though they are by the sea on the Hellespont, or on boiled meats, but only on roast meats, which are easier for soldiers to provide, since, generally speaking, it is easier to arrange to use a simple fire than to carry cooking equipment around with you. Very much so. Nor, I believe, does Homer ever mention sauces. And does not anyone who is in training know that if his body is to be in good condition, he should abstain from everything of this sort? Yes, they know, said he, and they abstain, and rightly so. And if you think these are right, my friends, it seems you will not praise Syracusan cuisine or Sicilian cookery in all its variety. I think not. Then you will not recommend a Corinthian maiden as a lady friend for men whose body is to be in good condition. Absolutely not. Nor the famed delights of Attic pastries. I must agree. And on the whole, I think we could liken a diet and a lifestyle of this sort to melody and song that employs all the modes and all the rhythms, and the comparison would be correct. Of course. Did not variety engender lack of restraint in that case? While in this case it engenders disease, and simplicity in music engenders sound-mindedness in souls, while simplicity in physical training engenders health in bodies. Very true. And when lack of restraint and diseases multiply in a city, do not law courts and medical centers open their doors in large numbers, while courtroom oratory and medical skill take on great solemnity, while when lots of people, even free men, get extremely serious about them? What else are they to do? But can we get any greater evidence of the bad and disgraceful system of education in a city than the fact that first-rate physicians and legal practitioners are needed, not only by the ordinary folk and the manual laborers, but also by those who pretend to have been brought up by the guise of freemen? If you do not think it is a disgrace and strong evidence of a lack of education to be compelled to use justice brought in from other people who act as your masters and judges because you do not have any resources of your own. It is the most disgraceful thing of all, said he. Or do you think, said I, that it is even more disgraceful when someone not only spends most of his life defending himself or prosecuting others in court, but is even persuaded, because he has no sense of nobility, to pride himself on this very fact? Sorry, I got a little head cold. On being clever when it comes to acting unjustly, and well up to the task of exploring every twist and turn, and every possible escape route to wriggle his way out, and avoid facing justice. Doing all this for the sake of worthless trivia, ignorant of how much better and more noble it would be to provide himself with a life that did not depend upon the solemnance of a juror. No, said he, this is even more disgraceful than the other example. And do you not think, said I, that it is a disgrace to need a physician because of injuries or some seasonal disease you have caught, but due to the idleness of the sort of lifestyle we were describing, filled with fluids and gases like some sort of swamp, compelling a refined Asclepiades to come up with names for diseases such as flatulences and catarrhs? Indeed, said he, these are novel and unusual names for diseases. The sort of diseases, said I, that in my view did not exist in Asclepiades' time, My evidence for this is that at Troy, his own sons did not find fault with the women who gave Pramnian wine, sprinkled lavishly with barley and grated cheese, to the wounded Eurypylus, even though these are believed to produce inflammation. Nor did they criticize Patroclus, who was responsible for the treatment. Yes, said he, that certainly was a strange potion for someone in that predicament. Not if you recognize, said I, that this fostering of diseases that is fashionable in modern medicine was not used by the Asclepiads of former times. Not until Herodicus arrived on the scene. But Herodicus was a physical trainer, and when he himself fell ill, mixed his physical exercise with medicine, and tormented himself first and foremost, and then did the same to lots of other people. In what way, he asked. He turned his own death, said I, into a lengthy process. For although he paid minute attention to the disease, which was a fatal one, he was, I believe, unable to cure himself, and he lived his entire life under medical treatment, with no time for anything else. Tormented, if he departed at all from his usual lifestyle, so struggling against death, aided by his wisdom, he managed to reach old age. So, said he won a beautiful prize from his skill. A fitting prize, said I, for someone who failed to realize that Asclepius was not ignorant, nor lacking experience in this form of medicine when he did not teach it to his offspring. Rather, he knew that everyone living under good laws is each assigned a single task in the city, which he must work at. And no one has time to spend his life being ill and being treated for an illness. And it is laughable that we are aware of this in the case of craftsmen, and do not notice it in the case of wealthy people, who are regarded as fortunate. How so, said he. Well, when a carpenter is ill, he expects the physician to give him his medicine to drink as an emetic for disease, or apply the purgative to get rid of it by burning or cutting. But if someone prescribes a lengthy regimen for him, placing felt hats on his head and so on, he quickly says that he has no time to be ill, nor is it worth his while to live in that way, preoccupied with disease and neglecting the function that is in front of him. With that, he bids farewell to physicians of this sort and resumes his usual lifestyle, and either gets healthy and lives on doing his own work, or else, if his body cannot take the strain, he dies and is quit of his troubles. Well, said he, that seems to be the proper approach to medical treatment for someone like this. So, was that because he had a function to perform, and it was not worth his while being alive if he could not perform it? Of course, said he. But the wealthy man, as we say, has no function of this sort set before him, one that makes life unlivable if he is compelled to give it up. Indeed not. That is what people say, at any rate. Do you not listen to Philoctetes, who said that once someone has a livelihood, he should practice excellence? Yes, said he, I think even before then. Well, let us not fight with him about this, said I. Instead, let us teach ourselves whether a wealthy person should practice this, and whether life is worth living for someone who does not do so. Or is the fostering of diseases an impediment to the application of the mind to carpentry and other skills, while it does not prevent us from adhering to the injunction of Philoctetes? Yes, by Zeus, said he, excessive attention to the body beyond simple physical training is almost the greatest impediment of them all. In fact, it is troublesome in running a household, in military campaigns, and in positions of authority in the city. But then, what is most significant is that it makes any kind of learning, reflection, or attention to oneself hard. It is constantly suspecting some tension, dizziness of the head, blaming this on philosophy. And so it acts as a total impediment to practicing and testing excellence in this way, for it constantly makes a person believe he is sick and makes him agonize incessantly about his body. Quite likely, said he. Should we maintain that Asclepius recognized all this too? There are those whose bodies are naturally healthy and have a healthy lifestyle, but have contracted some specific disease, and if it was for these people in this condition that he devised medicine for getting rid of diseases through drugs and surgery, prescribing their accustomed lifestyle so that he would not damage the public affairs of the city. While in the case of bodies that are diseased through and through, he did not attempt to contrive a long, bad life for the person by constantly pouring things in and draining things out, enabling him in all likelihood to produce more sickly offspring of this sort. Rather, he did not believe he should treat someone who was unable to live his life normally, following the established course, since this would not be worthwhile, either for himself or the city. You were saying, said he, that Asclepius was a statesman. Of course, said I, and his children too. Because of the sort of man he was. Or do you not see that at Troy they proved themselves to be good at warfare, and they practiced medicine in the way I described it? Or do you not also recall that in the case of Menelaus' wound, the one Pandorus infected on him, they sucked the blood and soothing simples sprinkled? But they did not prescribe what he should drink or eat afterwards, any more than they did for Eurypylus, since the drugs were quite sufficient to cure a man who had a healthy and orderly lifestyle before he was injured, even if he happened to take a barley and cheese wine drink afterwards. However, they thought it was not worthwhile, either for himself or anyone else, that someone who is diseased by nature and lacking restraint should live on. They decided that their skill should not be applied to people like this, and that they should not treat them, even if they were wealthier than Midas. You were saying, said he, that the sons of Asclepius were men of great refinement. Appropriately so, said I, and yet the tragedians and Pindar too are unconvinced by us, and they maintain that although Asclepius was son of Apollo, he was bribed by gold to cure a wealthy man who was already at the point of death. And for this, they say, he was struck by a thunderbolt. Whereas we, adhering to what we said before, are unconvinced by either of their claims. Rather, if he was the son of a god, we shall maintain that he was not corruptible. And if he was corruptible, he was not the son of a god. Well, you are quite right about that, he said, but what point are you making here, Socrates? Should we not have good physicians in our city? And presumably the best qualified doctors would be the ones who had treated the greatest number of healthy people, and sick people too. And the same would go for jurors. The best ones would have consorted with a whole range of people of all sorts and varieties. I am referring to good ones, very much so, said I. But do you know who I regard as good? I would if you told me, he said it. I will try, but you were asking about two dissimilar cases in the same question. How so? He asked. Physicians, said I, become highly accomplished if, beginning in childhood, besides learning their skill, they also deal with as many bodies as possible, of the most degenerate kind, and have themselves suffered from all of these diseases, and are by nature utterly unhealthy. For I do not believe they treat a body using their own body. Indeed, if that were the case, their bodies would never be allowed to be in a bad condition or become so. But they treat a body using their own soul, which cannot be allowed to become bad, or to be so, if it is out to carry out the treatment well. Correct, said he. But a juror, my friend, rules over a soul using his own soul, which should not be allowed from its earliest years to be reared among degenerate souls, or to consort with them, act unjustly itself, and systemically go through all of the injustices, so that it may, with a keen eye, detect the injustices of others, like bodily diseases. It must rather, from its earliest years, have no experience of evil dispositions, and be uncontaminated by them. If it is to be noble and good, and deliver sound judgments as to what is just. That is why the most suitable candidates appear simple minded when they are young, and are easily deceived by unjust folk, since they do not have patterns within themselves that resemble the response of evildoers. Yes, indeed, said he, that is certainly what happens to them. And that is why, said I, a good juror should rather be old rather than young. Someone who has learned late in life what just injustice is by realizing that it does not belong in his own soul, and practicing for a considerable time being fully aware of it as something alien, something present in alien souls, as an innate badness. To this knowledge he should have recourse rather than his own direct experience. Well, a jury like this, said he, seems to be the noblest kind of all. And good, too, which is what you were asking about. For anyone who has a good soul is good, but that clever fellow with a suspicious mind, who has done a lot of evil deeds himself, who is cunning, and thinks he is wise when in the company of people like himself, appears clever when he is being cautious, and looks to his own internal patterns. But when he is alongside good people, or his elders, at that stage, by contrast, he appears stupid, by being unnecessarily suspicious, unable to recognize a healthy disposition because he does not possess patterns of this sort. But since he meets degenerate people more often than worthy people, he seems to himself and to others to be more wise rather than more foolish. Yes, said he, this is true, entirely so. Well, then, we should seek out a juror of this sort. If we want a good and wise one, we should seek the previous sort. For degeneracy would never recognize both excellence and itself. But natural excellence may be educated over time to apprehend both itself and degeneracy simultaneously. So this person, as I see it, and not the bad person, turns out to be wise. That is the way I see it too. And will you not prescribe laws for our city, instituting medicine as we described it, alongside this sort of judicial practice? Well, these treat those citizens of yours whose bodies and souls are naturally good, and if this is not so, allow those who are naturally bad off to die, naturally bad in body to die off, while they themselves put to death those who are naturally bad in soul and incurable. And this is apparently, said he, what is best for both the people in this predicament and for the city. And so your young folk will be careful not to need a judicial process like this by making use of that simple music which we say engenders sound-mindedness. Indeed, said he, and will not the musical person, by following the same trail, in the same case of physical training, if he wishes, understand how to avoid the need for medical treatment, except when it is necessary? It seems so to me, at any rate. Even the physical training itself and the exercises are something that he will work on with the spirited aspect of his nature rather than physical strength in view, other than athletes who make use of diet and exercise for the sake of strength. Quite right, said he. In that case, Galcon, it is not the case that those who are established education in music and physical training did not do so with the intention that some people assume, that one would treat the body while the other would treat the soul. What was their intention, then, he asked. it is most likely, he said, that they establish both, mainly for the sake of the soul. How so? Have you not noticed how the mind itself is affected in people who devote themselves throughout their lives to physical exercise, and have nothing to do with music, and in those who do the exact opposite? What are you referring to, he asked. A fierceness and a hardness in one case, and a softness and a gentleness in the other. I have noticed, said he, that those who devote themselves exclusively to physical training turn out fiercer than they should be, while those who do so, in the case of music, become softer than is good for them. And indeed, said I, the fierceness is derived from the spirited part of the nature, and given the proper nurture, it would constitute courage. But if it becomes more intense than it should, it is likely to become hard and harsh. This is how it seems to me. Well, what about this? Would not the philosophic nature be associated with the gentleness? And if this is relaxed too much, will it not be softer than it should be? And if it is properly nurtured, will it not be gentle and orderly? Quite so. And we are saying that our guardians should possess both of these natures. They should. And should not the two be in harmony with one another? Of course. And where there is such harmony, the soul is sound-minded and courageous. Entirely so. And where there is disharmony, it is cowardly and harsh. Very much so. Now, is it not the case that whenever someone surrenders to music, to be charmed by the flute sounds, pouring into his soul through his ears, as if through a funnel, pouring in those sweet, soft, dirge-like harmonies we spoke of just now, and lives his whole life humming delightfully in song? This man, if he possessed a spirited part, softens it at first, like iron, and renders it useful instead of being useless and brittle. And when he pours music on it unceasingly, and it works its charms, he then proceeds to melt his spirit, turn it to liquid, until he finally dissolves it away, as if he were severing the very sinews of his soul, turning it into a feeble warrior. Entirely so. Now, if he were endowed by nature from the very outset with a soul devoid of spirit, this would happen very quickly. But if it were spirited, having weakened the spirit, he would render the soul unstable, quick to quarrel over trivia, just as quick to calm down. So he becomes a bad-tempered and irascible, rather than spirited, and he is filled with discontent. Yes, exactly. And what if someone in contrast works hard at physical training and feeds himself well, very well, but refrains from music and philosophy? At first, because his body is in such good shape, will he not be filled with confidence and spirit and become more courageous than he was before? Very much so. And what if he practiced nothing else and had no communion with muse at all? Even if there was some love of learning in his soul, since it never gets a taste of learning or of iniquity, of inquiry, and is never involved in discourse or music in general, will it not become weak and deaf and blind, since it is never awakened or nourished, and its awareness is never purified? Just so, said he. And then a person like this becomes a hater of discourse and is devoid of music. He no longer uses verbal persuasion, but he gets his results in everything through force and violence, like some wild animal. And he lives his life in ignorance and ineptitude, without any rhythm or grace. That is it, said he, entirely so. Well, it seems since these two, the spirited and philosophic, I would say that some God has given humanity two skills, music and physical training, aimed at the spirited and the philosophic, not at the soul and the body, except incidentally, but at these two, so that they may be harmonized with one another by tightening and slackening them to the appropriate extent. Yes, it seems to be that way. So the person who blends physical training most beautifully with music and applies them to the soul with the utmost measure is the one we may rightly declare to be perfectly musical and well harmonized in the highest degree, much more so than anyone who tunes the strings of an instrument. Quite likely, Socrates. In that case, Glaucon, will we not always need some overseer of this sort in our city, if our constitution is to be preserved? Indeed, we shall need this most of all. These then would be the guidelines for their education and numbering. Indeed, why would anyone itemize the dances, hunts, chases, athletic contests, and horse races that people like this would have? Surely it is quite obvious that these must adhere to those guidelines and should no longer be hard to discover. Probably not. So be it. Well then, what shall we decide next? Will we not need to decide which of the same people will rule and which of them will be ruled? How much farther is this? You know what? I think we'll be able to get a whole nother bit out of this. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up here. Now that they are going to be looking for something new, right? This is the search for the appropriate men to be guardians of the city. They should be well versed in both the physical aspects, defense, warfare, physical labor, the crafts, and with the philosophical, the ability to appreciate music and art and beauty, the ability to understand satire and sarcasm. The way that they're excluding them from the perfect city is a sense of irony, right? Because you are taking away basically what makes people essentially human. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment, not too much confusing, to a somewhat straightforward topic, right? There's not a whole lot for me to expound upon in here. This is a recitation. This is us trying to impart some wisdom. Somewhere, somebody will listen to this, and they will understand the works of Plato a little bit better. I am reading it so that I understand the works of Plato a little bit better, and I have picked up things from this. Hopefully, that's what I'm helping you to do as well. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.